Welcome back. One of the big debates in forensic science and throughout software is the use of open source versus closed source software. And in forensics, it's no different. There are many open source solutions out there, as well as some very expensive closed source solutions that can be used to investigate a case and investigate a hard drive. For example, the forensic server project that you're using is open source. Harlan Carvey, the guy who created it, is one of the masterminds of computer forensics. On the other hand, I use Access Data's forensic toolkit at work every day. I also use EnCase, Cellbrite, very expensive closed source tools. For example, a license of Access Data's forensics toolkit will run you about $5,000 to get a dongle for that. Now, a lot of places, a lot of companies can't afford that. Quite frankly, if it wasn't for some assistance with grants and stuff like that, my agency couldn't afford that either. However, we do use a lot of open source software also. I'm a forensic video analyst, and I use VirtualDub pretty much on every case I work anymore. I also use um, the Forensic Codec Appliance G-Spot to identify codecs. I mean, these tools have been around for a long time in the forensic video world, and we use them on a daily basis. As a matter of fact, VirtualDub was actually used in a case, in a civil case in Vancouver, where the forensic video analyst who was analyzing video of an individual that was tased by the Vancouver Police Department used VirtualDub, and it came up very heavily within that case. So let's talk about some of the problems and some of the good and bad things about open source and closed source forensic. Number one, security. Can we report on what the program is doing? One of the problems with open source systems is that you don't know the intent of the programmer. When Google was reporting on the Android marketplace, they reported that there was a large quantity of malware masking itself as other types of software. So you do not know exactly what's going on when that program is running. So, oh, hey, this is the latest, greatest open source registry editor, a registry examination tool. But is it really doing that? Or is it sending information someplace we don't want information to go? And then there's the other thing with reliability. Software can be optimized to use multiple cores, to use your system resources correctly. And with open source software, you don't know if the individual creating that software can understand and make that work. Are they optimizing it out? Is it crashing your system? Is it locking up your system? I actually had a RAM leak using FTK's closed source system that I have 32 gigabytes of RAM in my forensic system. It used all of it and pretty much just stopped. So even with closed sourced tested systems and software, you can have these kind of problems. So you have to take a look at what is the software doing to my system. Is it just killing it? And if you get the blue screen of death, I'm not running it anymore. Then we have to look at support. If I'm having a problem with the software, if I'm having legal issues, and we're going to talk about legal issues here coming up with the software, is there someplace I can go? Is there a expert? Is there a help desk? Can I contact the person who created the software? Are they willing to even help me? Because remember, once we're done with a forensic examination, there's a whole nother ballgame that's out there, and we're going to talk about that next. So remember, free is nice, but we have to take a look at the software and the reliability of it, the security. We have to test all this stuff in every forensic solution that we use. You can't just say, hey, here's the latest and greatest thing. So for evidence to be allowed in the court, the forensic process has to be verified and accepted. Validation. This means we are going to test this system, and it's going to have to be tested in the courtroom. When I mentioned that VirtualDub was used in the case against Taser, VirtualDub was created by an individual named Avery Lee. And Avery hasn't, he works on and does some updates every now and then, but it's not that much. He was actually subpoenaed to the courtroom in Canada and had to go to Canada and testify and cross-examination by the defense as to what VirtualDub does. just because an individual used it for the forensic examination in that case. It's the same thing here. Now, Harlan Carvey has no problem coming and doing that. But we have to understand that in the courtroom, there is a whole process that we go through. And we're going to talk about that. And remember, just because software seems to work, it may not have done it in a manner that is going to pass the court. And that's the whole key to the whole process. So remember, open source and closed source have to go through both of these processes. Just because I purchased FTK doesn't mean that it automatically gets accepted. I have to go ahead and be vetted through that. Now, FTK has been vetted, and Access Data, the company that makes FTK, and Guidance Software that makes EnCase, will send experts to the courtroom on their expense, not yours, to come and do the courtroom proceedings for you with open source software. So the admissibility standard in the United States is a Daubert standard. And Daubert means that you're going to have a hearing, a Daubert hearing. And in the Daubert hearing, the evidence and or the process or scientific methodology that was used to gather and find that evidence is going to be argued about in the courtroom. And they're going to talk about what kind of testing you did. Was there errors? Is there other publications out there? Did somebody else use this stuff? Is it accepted? Okay, one of the reasons I can use VirtualDub in my forensic video is that it is accepted by the forensic video analysis community. There are publications about it. Does it have an error rate? You bet, but it's been very well tested. I can use it. Now, the other one that is used is a FRI test or a FRI hearing. In the state of Arizona, our standard is a FRI hearing. Now, there is a difference, but you have to understand that basically it's the same thing. You're going to be arguing about what you did. And remember, if you're going to be testifying as an expert, you are going to be put on the stand under what's called voir dire. And in voir dire, your qualifications to do any of those work that you did is going to be challenged. And you are going to be defending yourself against prosecution and defense. If the prosecution tries to get you in as an expert witness and defense tries to get you out. So not only is the software you're using being tested in the courtroom, you're being tested in the courtroom. And you have to make it through the Daubert standard and the FRI standards. So the Federal Rules of Evidence, basically Federal Rules of Evidence 100, talks about this from a federal level, and it comes down from there. And with open source and closed source software, we have to determine that make sure that we are maintaining the rules of evidence and how they apply. So when you testify, we cannot talk about open source versus closed source without testifying, because a lot of the software used is going to be challenged and you're going to have to testify to it. You're going to be challenged. It's going to get ugly. The defense attorneys are going to try to get you all tongue-tied. They're going to try to get you to say dumb things. They're going to try to get you to say all these big fancy words that the jury doesn't understand or the judge doesn't understand. Excuse me. And even the judge gets in on the act. The judge could ask questions too. I once spent 8 hours in the stand in Prescott, Arizona, explaining to a judge, not the defense attorney, not the prosecution, the judge, why I just couldn't take the motherboard out of a DVR, a digital video recorder, and replace it with one I could buy at Fry's Electronics. The judge had no idea that that was not possible, that the motherboards for those products are specialized. Had no idea. And that took me 8 hours to explain it to that guy. I got home from that case and the judge calls me. I've been a cop 22 years. I've never had a judge call me and says, hey, I just wanted to make sure that there was no questions so you didn't have to drive back up to Prescott. So understand that this is going to go on. Is it scary sometimes? You bet. But if you're going to be in forensics, whether you stay on the civil side or on the criminal side like I am, you may end up in a courtroom someday. You have to be ready for that. That's part. So I told you that closed source software has a ton of resources to back you up. These companies hire experts. They got guys on staff. As a matter of fact, Guidance Software has an individual who used to be a lieutenant in my department. He is one of the godfathers of computer forensics. And he will come out and testify as to what the software does. They have guys with computer knowledge that it boggles the mind what these guys know about computers. It's fun talking to them. So with open source, I talked to you about what happened with Virtual Dub when Avery Lee went up to testify in this taser case. To tell you how big that case was, the use of tasers throughout all of Canada was regulated following that case. So every police department, every police officer, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the guys who dress up like Dudley Do-Right, and if you don't know who that is, look it up. It's a cartoon from a long time ago. I'm showing my age. They had an impact to how they conduct business on a daily basis based on a video that was worked using an open source piece of software called Virtual Dub, created by a guy named Avery Lee, who created it as part of a college project. So you see the seriousness and the reach of the implications of open source versus closed source software. Now, there's a lot of open sources out there. There's SANS, their forensic SIFT station is awesome, and it's gone through validation. There's Harlan Carvey's Forensic Server Project. It's gone through validation, and those guys can answer, does the software do what it said it does, and is it doing something it's not supposed to do? So when you have good, solid research and testing of open source software backing you up, you're good to go. So let's wrap this up. Make sure your software is validated. Open source software is fine, as long as it's been through a validation process that has been documented. The SANS Institute, Mr. Carvey's projects, things like that. Things that you can't know that you can get some backup, at least some documentation and publications to show that the software is legit and is doing what it's supposed to do. Be prepared to defend your software in court. Look, testifying can be scary. You're the guy in the hot seat. You're the one in the stand sweating it out. The attorneys don't care. They get paid to do this every day. And you may walk out of there feeling like the biggest fool in the earth. And remember, a misstep in there can really have far-reaching problems for everybody else. Think about the taser case. All of Canada, every police officer in Canada had their taser use determined by that one case, determined by a piece of open source software. So number one, you have to understand too, well, actually no, it's not number one, it's probably way down on the list, but you have to test your software and you have to keep the documentation of those results. A lot of labs you're going to be working for may be involved in accreditation, and they will set up rules as to software validation and testing and documentation and how to keep those documents, okay? So remember, open source is fine, closed source is fine. Either way, the software is going to have to stand up to the Dalbert, the Fry, the voir dires that you're going to have to put through. It's going to have to stand up to these courtroom challenges. So be prepared for it. Understand what your software does. Document what your software does. Test it, and you should have no problems. Any questions?